welcome to everyone. Welcome to the fall meeting MU-NCORP PI session. Dr. Hirschman and I are going to sort of go through this together as we have the last couple of years. Pretty short agenda we have today. I think they're really, Can you hear me? No?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Somebody just sent, I think Jeff Bernberg said couldn't hear, but so long as it's not coming from my end. So saying welcome to everyone. Looking forward to, having this today. Unfortunately, we couldn't meet in person, but thankfully technology continues to facilitate our interactions. Don, are you able to pick up and, yeah.
Yeah, so I apologize in advance. I'm having some wonky IT issues, as is the state of the world right now. So I hope you can all hear me. I want to welcome you all. For those of you who have already started SWOG, for those of you who this is your first SWOG meeting, it should be an exciting week. Ray and I were at our first in-person meeting at ASCO. What was it, 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago? And it was super exciting to be in person. And so we look forward to seeing everybody in the spring in person. Hopefully that's the way of the future. I think, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about using this as an opportunity to really try to address issues that everybody's facing in terms of conducting clinical research, and anything we can do to help or to learn from each other in terms of how to deal with some of the challenges that have presented themselves in these new trying times. So with that, I'm going to let Ray sort of lead us through the agenda. Again, anybody who has any issues or questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah, thanks, Don. So we have a fairly short agenda today. Hopefully you can have a great meeting. We're going to talk about EPRO updates. I think Veja is going to tell us about that. We're also going to talk about remote audits, expectations, and the quality of data. Elaine Armstrong will present that. And then, these are tough times. They've been tough for all of us. We've had challenges at work, including turnover. So CRA turnover issues we can talk about. And then last but not least, we, as usual, would like to hear from NCI. So I know Bernard Parker's got some slides that he's going to share with us. And I think Kate Castro, as usual, is probably also in attendance. I think Kate had said she was planning to join us. So let's go to the presentations. I think Dr. Veja is going to tell us about EPROs.
All right, thank you. So, should I have control of the slides, or will someone be advancing them for me?
I think the slides are centrally advanced. Can you please advance the slides?
Yeah, yep, that's the one. All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Riha Vaidya. I am a staff scientist at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, and I'm a statistician on SWOG's CCDR and symptom control and quality of life committees. I also coordinate SWOG's PRO core. And what I'm going to do today is just give a brief overview of the electronic capture of PROs or EPROs, just sort of why we use them and a few logistical concerns, especially since we have a new study as 2013 where we have started using EPROs. So we thought this would be a good time to just give an overview for everyone. Next slide, please. So many of you are probably familiar with EPRO from other studies or studies that are done by other groups that use PROs. So for just a quick introduction, EPRO really refers to any means of electronic capture of patient-reported data. And these have included various means over time, telephone-based systems like IVRS, web applications like RedCap, and more recently, mobile applications that are commonly used in NCI-sponsored studies that use EPRO. Next slide, please. So why do we use EPRO in our studies? So in recent years, access to technological devices has become more widespread. I mean, if you look at like American Community Survey data, we see that over 90% of households have access to some sort of computers, including smartphones, and about 85% of them have access to broadband internet. So given that there is a lot of access to technology and to networks, EPRO provides patients the ability to complete patient-reported outcome forms from the comfort of their home. What it also does is reduces the burden of paper forms and data entry for sites. And more importantly, EPRO can help us with data accuracy and compliance issues on patient-reported outcome forms. For example, it can help avoid out-of-range responses where a patient may enter a response that is not one of the options that's available on the form. It will also provide automated reminders to patients to complete PRO forms. Next slide, please. So what are a few considerations in using EPRO? So EPRO can really be used for any sort of patient data collection. It doesn't necessarily have to be validated patient-reported outcome forms. It can also be used for other non-validated forms, such as any questionnaires that are created by investigators for specific studies. There may be cases where EPRO is not suitable. One example is if there are baseline PRO assessments that go into determining eligibility for the trial. At least at this point, it may be best to use paper forms for those and then use EPRO for follow-ups. There are also a few other things to consider when using EPRO, such as timing considerations. How much time do we want between assessments? What is the availability of forms going to be like in terms of when do the patients get to see the forms in their EPRO app with respect to sort of when that form is due. So these are just some things that need to be thought through before making the decision to use EPRO in studies. Next slide, please. So coming to the logistics of actually using EPRO once a decision has been made to use EPRO in our studies. So for any NCI-sponsored studies, the EPRO mechanism that's used is Metadata's Patient Cloud app. This is a mobile-based app which can be used either on the patient's own smartphone or tablet that's connected to the internet, or on a site-provided mobile device with an internet connection. A big advantage of the Patient Cloud app is that any data that are entered into the Patient Cloud app by the patient is directly uploaded to Rave. So that saves sites the time of taking the paper forms and transcribing that data into Rave. In terms of access for site staff and learning materials, these are all available in iMetadata. And any study protocol that includes EPRO will have all of the information listed in the protocol in terms of how sites are supposed to access EPRO and what trainings they need to complete before they're able to use it. Next slide, please. So EPRO certainly is not without challenges, the biggest one being the availability of compatible mobile devices. Some patients may have old mobile devices that don't run the most recent operating systems that may be needed to be able to use these apps. And while internet access is more widespread now than it was before, there may still be regions, especially rural areas, where internet access may not be very good. So that would still be a concern for some patients. And then there's also the issue of comfort with technology, because when we're talking about mobile-based apps, they will often need things like updates to be on the latest version. And sometimes the questionnaires will not work if you don't have the latest version and things like that. So these are just some things to be mindful of when deciding whether to use EPRO in the study. Next slide, please. And then there are also challenges for sites, because there is the process of registering the patient to the trial, but then there's a whole separate process for registering patients to be able to use EPRO. it's still likely to require some data entry and follow-up, because as we're new to using EPRO, there may still be some things like the baseline forms I mentioned before, or certain other forms where data is critical and we need to make sure we have all the data we need. We may still resort to using paper forms. There may still be some follow-up requirements for sites in terms of looking at whether the patient has completed the forms in EPRO, reminding them to do so, etc. And like I said, we still will need to use multiple modalities to collect data, because there may be patients who may not want to use electronic PROs and still prefer to use paper. Next slide, please. So for SWOG studies, most recently we have S2013, the iCheckIt study, which opened a few months ago, that is offering patients the option to use EPRO. The baseline PRO assessments for this study are all on paper, but patients have the option to opt into EPRO at follow-up. There is also an EPRO feasibility questionnaire that will be administered to patients at the end of the study. This is mainly for us to get an understanding of what challenges patients face using EPRO, whether they like it, whether they're likely to be using it for future studies, etc. All of the resource documents are available with a metadata rave login for sites, and the information is also in the protocol. And one thing I do want to mention is that the data coordinators are definitely monitoring for any EPRO related questions that come up. So sites can contact cancer control question at crab.org for any EPRO related issues. And depending on what sort of questions we get on there, there will definitely be some documentation created if it helps down the road to help answer some frequently asked questions. Next slide, please. And that is all I have. If we have time, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I think it'll be good to get some Q&A here. We have 3 other items, but I think we could take a few minutes. This is such a novel thing. It should be worthwhile to.
So can I ask a question?
Sure, Don, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. So I have a question about missing data and how sites are supposed to know when patients have completed the forms or not, when it's being done by patients at their own. Are they triggered? Do they know what's been done? How do you deal with this with regard to audits? What's the responsibility of the sites from a follow-up perspective?
All right. So my understanding from reading all of the documentation on EPRO is that sites are able to go into RAVE and see if patients have completed the questionnaires that they're supposed to complete in EPRO if they've opted into EPRO. And at the site visit, they will be able to remind patients. I think it might depend a little bit on what sort of windows for data collection for the EPRO data form completion are chosen. So I will have to ask maybe the DCs or the stats on the protocol about whether sites can remind patients to complete the form before that assessment window is over, but certainly they can see if it has been done in the past, and they can remind patients to complete those forms in the future at least.
Okay, Vidya, a question. Are there any particular setup challenges or know-how that the sites have to have? And what about data security, patient privacy?
Right. So in terms of know-how, I think everything sites need to know, at least for the use of EPRO, is available in the training materials for sites. So that should ideally be sufficient to get sites using EPRO with patients. And I believe that confidentiality and data security is taken care of in the design of these sites, and the access to data is only available to authorized personnel who would have access to the patient data in Rave, even if the forms were done in paper. There, I guess, might be the concern on the patient's end when they're completing the questionnaires, if somebody else sort of has access to their phone or their device. And that's certainly a great question to think of, but that is not something I've seen come up a lot in discussions.
Great.
Is there, I don't see any other questions, but is there like a dashboard that can be, that the providers or research staff can have access to see what's complete and what's not complete for an individual patient, or even the results?
I am not aware of any dashboard other than them just being able to see in Rave what is completed or not. But that's a good question to take back to the EPRO working group meetings that I often join in, and see if there are any other resources apart from checking in Rave.
Still no questions, but I'm going to throw a question out to the other PIs on the call. Does anybody have any concerns, objections, or insights that they would like to share about this whole trend towards EPROs? Are there local issues that people might have?
Who's the doctor you were saying down there?
Speak now or forever hold thy peace. All right, well, it sounds like everybody's pretty comfortable. I don't see.
There is a message, I guess, from Jeff in terms of concerns about access to technology.
So Jeff, you want to, Jeff and Amy offering us,
yeah, they're
weigh in.
I mean, there are certain populations that, don't really have, I mean, most people have access to cell phones, although the cost can be an issue. I know some studies will pay for that, and that could be positive. The other thing is the sort of more general, maybe slightly off the topic, but the requirement for PROs in general is a impediment to accrual of a number of individuals from recently immigrated communities that cannot complete these. From a point of view of language is also the lack of validation. I know NCI is working on Spanish and Chinese, but there's many other languages, particularly in Hawaii, but other sites as well. And there's no exemption to participation in PROs in general for treatment trials and other trials. Well, some other trials is critical, but so that remains a barrier. And the only trial we've been able to recruit in the Micronesian community has been in trials for screening like the TMIS that don't have these instruments. So it remains a concern for us.
Several other comments have come in. I think people are raising the possibilities of various barriers. Age has just come up. Dr. Vaidya, are patients able to delegate the responses to somebody maybe more technologically adept than they are if they had limitations? Do we allow that, or does it have to be the enrolled patient who does it?
I think ideally it should be the patient. So I know, at least with paper forms, sometimes we do things like telephone follow-up if a clinic visit is not possible, where where site staff will read out questions and the patient will respond, and the site staff will just mark the responses. And I don't know that we necessarily allow something like that for EPRO, but yeah, that would be a thing to consider, at least the pros and cons of having something like that.
I mean, this reassures people. I actually have a Cancer Moonshot grant that is implementing EPROs as a routine part of care delivery. It's a 6-site study, including a couple of sites in the South and both community and academic healthcare systems, rural and urban and so on. And what we have found is that after initial startup blues with some, multi-level, engagement, administrators all the way down, you can actually use EPROs as a routine part of your care delivery, not even just research, which requires a whole bunch of extra hoops because the things dump directly into EPIC, the routine clinical care feedback that patients give you in between the physical visits. The point I'm making is this is coming. The analogy I give is it's the difference between going to a travel agent to book a flight, as we used to do all the time, and sitting at your computer at home and making your travel arrangements yourself. The technology is there now.
Yeah, and another thing that might help with older patients is maybe having a web form option, because there may be a lot of older patients who may be comfortable with desktop or laptop computers, but not necessarily with mobile technology.
Yeah, and a few other comments coming in. I think Anne Geiger just raised some concerns about having a proxy respond. And then there was another one about just reminding us that the EPRO is really one more avenue. It right now, it does not replace paper responses. So that is a good thing to remember for this particular trial. Great, Dawn, shall we move to the next agenda item?
We should definitely move on, but I just want to encourage people to use this as an opportunity to engage with patients going on trials, to encourage them to do this if if they do choose this option. Obviously, if they don't have to, if there's some major discomfort, we'd rather have the data. I think we all are a little bit nervous that we're going to be missing data this way. We want to make it convenient for patients, and so we will be monitoring on the back end. But obviously, for some patients, it may be one more thing that they have to do. They don't have to do it. We can do paper and pencil questionnaires, but for others, it provides an opportunity for us to capture their symptoms, in the place that they may be experiencing it the most. So as we move forward with this trial and many others, I think feedback is going to be really imperative to make sure we have high quality data.
Excellent. All right, I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is remote audits. Elaine Armstrong is going to give us an update on that.
Okay, hopefully, is that everything working now?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. You just need to just tell them when you want the slides to move.
Okay, I also opened the video. Oh, I see, never mind. Okay, okay, next slide. And also fix this. Okay. So remote audits at this point, the status is that for registration study audits, which, is usually 1 or 2 charts, can be more if we're auditing more than one study. The default remains doing remote audits. But for treatment audits, it's really just based on what will work with the site, because we still have to look at current travel restrictions, not so much travel restrictions, but restrictions at the site. Some places still are not comfortable or willing to let people come on site. Others are opening up. We try to conduct the larger audits on site. It's just a lot easier. But we just have to see what works with the sites, and we're going on site a little bit more now than we did, say, 6 months ago. But it's just kind of a give and take to work that out. The thing is, with doing audits remotely, it's definitely a slower process. We have to plan extra time. We cannot get through as many cases per auditor per day when it's conducted remotely. And source documentation. Oh, my slides are. Source documentation can be available through the EMR. It can be available through the, I'm sorry, I'm having to pull up my slides. I can't see them on there. Oh, source documentation can be made available through EMR Access or uploaded into CTSU source document portal or another shared portal. Next slide. So what are the pros and cons? If we have access to the EMR, that gives us the most access to the documentation. I don't think that anybody, I'm not accusing anybody of not giving us access to data by uploading it. It's just that, you know, if you're uploading documents into a portal, you may upload office visit documentation. And then as we're reviewing that office visit, we see a reference to something that, oh, this is information we need and it hasn't been uploaded. So it's just that, you know, if you have the EMR in front of you, you can pretty much get to anything you need. So what are the cons for a remote audit? Well, doing EMR access is just not an option at some sites. It can be an extremely difficult, time-consuming process to get the necessary permissions at some sites. And we don't even really attempt to get that permission anymore for the registration study audits because it's not worth spending hours and hours to get permission for 1 or 2 charts. I mean, we've had sites send us 25-page forms that we have to send to legal, and they're just like, no, we have better things to do with our time than trying to wade through this document, sign off on something to give you access to the EMR. The other thing is if we're, of course, with the NCORPs, because NCORPs are usually multiple sites that have completely different EMR systems, different platforms, that might mean we have to go through that process of getting EMR access to multiple sites for a single audit. One example is recently we audited Ozarks NCORP, and I think we had to have 4 different types of access set up. One site had one EMR and then the hospital records were within a different system. Sometimes they will require us to do training, and we really balk at doing any kind of training if it's related to just basic GCP, that sort of thing. And if they're going to require us to go through, 8 hours of training to access the EMR, once again, that's just not something that we have the time to do. Next slide. So the other option is the CTSU has a source document portal that was quickly it was already in place for central monitoring, but when COVID hit, they quickly worked to make this accessible for audits. And of course, the best thing about it is it's an alternative when EMR access is not available, but it's also a very time-consuming process for sites. You can imagine if you have a patient on a leukemia protocol with 24 cycles, the amount of labs and data that has to be uploaded into one of those documents takes a lot. It's a lot of work. And as I mentioned before, things can be selectively uploaded, not meaning that was intentional, but it's just, you're thinking you've got all your bases covered. And then during the review, we realize there's a lot of things that we need. And then communication just becomes really critical when documents are uploaded because there's oftentimes requests for additional documents. One other option is some sites have uploaded their documents into a shared portal that they use at their site. Some examples are Box and SharePoint. That's sometimes better because the CTSU portal has certain naming conventions and has certain categories that you have to upload into. So it's something that's not labeled by the naming conventions, then we can't access the document. So it can be a little tricky, but CTSU has been very, very receptive to feedback and is constantly working to improve the portal. So, it's doing pretty good. Next slide. So an important part of the audit process, of course, is the opportunity for the audit team to share information about data quality and data management and other aspects of quality assurance with the site staff. And of course, when audits are conducted remotely, it really limits our ability to do that. We just don't interact with as many people, or we're interacting through an email versus a conversation oftentimes. So it's just less than ideal, but I don't think remote audits are ever going to go away going forward. I think there's a place for it, but I do welcome the time when we can go on site, because I think this is a better process for everybody. We did an audit just a couple of weeks ago at MU-NCORP, and they had 25 different sites that were being audited. So you can imagine if we had to deal with 25 different EMRs of different sites remotely, that would have been very difficult. But instead, the audit was conducted on site, and 90% of the staff from the sites were able to come and travel to the audit location. So that's kind of an overview where we are. I know you had included in the request to talk about data quality, and I don't know that I was particularly clear on what the intent was there. I did, though, want to make one comment. You know, as you know, cancer control studies run the gamut. There's so much. So there's so many different types of studies, and a lot of times information that's collected is not information that would normally be captured, say, in an H&P, in an office visit note. So we're going to be talking at our Quality Assurance Committee meeting about maybe working towards creating source document, like templates that can be used for some of these studies, because it makes it easier for the site and for the auditors if you've summarized that data onto a source document type template, rather than us having to go through lots of notes. For instance, a financial impact study, the information collected on a study like that oftentimes is just not captured in a normal type of a note. So then it's really important that some staff documents that, and we'll find that information missing. So I think if we can work together to create some templates for some of these studies, I think that will help the quality of the data, and I think it'll just make it easier and make audits go better. And that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions.
Just a few comments. I punched in something about, I think you alluded to it, whether remote auditing will be a permanent fixture post-COVID. You said yes in some fashion. And if so, are we beginning to figure out criteria by which we will determine what audit needs to be on-site and which ones can be remote? And will the sites be able to choose?
Well, we have not gotten any kind of feedback from the NCI yet. I know that on the registration study audits, you know, we have quite a few studies where on one arm you're on observation and there may not be any investigational drug involved. If there's no need to go to the pharmacy, and if the number of cases is small enough to make it a reasonable type thing, then I think those types of audits would probably most likely be done remotely. But when you're talking large numbers or the need to visit the pharmacy, now we have done pharmacy reviews remotely through you know, Zoom or something like that. But it sometimes it's not quite as, you know, it's not quite as good as going on site and talking to staff and seeing things in person. But I think that's at this point, all I can say is just the smaller number, if the numbers are small and if there's no need for pharmacy, that would be the most likely ones that would stay remote. And it, you know, it may be something like, well, every other audit would be remote versus on site, something like that. But we haven't really gone there yet, since we're kind of just now getting back a little bit closer to normal.
Great. Elaine, Amanda Deansdale has a comment in the chat. They have been making source document templates locally for remote audits of their trials. And she thinks it would be very, in caps, capital letters, helpful to have SWOG somehow create those templates for the trials? What do you think?
Well, I agree, because if every site were to take it upon themselves, why would you want, 25 sites going through that effort when it can be done one time? Of course, then we're talking, there's definitely resources needed to create those, centrally, but in some cases, it could be as simple as taking the actual form itself, because SWOG always has the forms, the master forms in a paper version. It's online, but it correlates to what's in RAID. And sometimes it might be as simple as taking that form and adding a signature and date line. Other times it might take a little bit more work, but I definitely think if it could be done centrally so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel at multiple sites, that's the route to go.
So is SWOG going to do that if this proves, as we all suspect, to be a permanent fixture?
Well, as far as doing the templates, we're just kind of, I'm starting the conversation. So I don't have really too much to report at this point, other than I intend to really push for it.
So Amy has a comment and a question. Amy, I don't know if you. Sorry, Don, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if we're getting feedback, but I think, we can use this meeting to get feedback to sort of bring back to SWOG to try to make it easier for sites and for investigators. Obviously, there's nothing more tragic, and I have been there a few times, where, you put time, energy, and effort, years into developing a protocol, years into getting all the approvals and getting the study accrued, and then having data back that's incomplete or a mishmash, or that you can't interpret. And, there's always, that's why this piece of data collection is so absolutely critically important. And now that we are more remote, one of the, it gives us an opportunity to question what the purpose of the audits are. And the purpose of the audits, I think, are sometimes to educate sites so that you can see where you're making some error that you've made on every single patient. Sometimes it helps you then have better data quality going forward. And as much as we can try to adopt our methods to try to both help sites so that they can learn, but also not make it onerous for them from an auditing perspective, we can ensure that balance between, high quality data and being able to minimize the discomfort of audits. So I don't know if we can use some of these examples and questions as a call to arms, so to speak, to try to figure out how we can standardize some of this data collection.
Right.
All right, we're going to take one last comment before we go. Amy Koffernas has a comment in the chat. Templates for source documentation on DCP trials would be helpful. That's one. However, some sites are recording items like that in research notes, which the physician signs. So here's the question. Maybe you could include smart phrase templates as well. Can we include smart phrase templates as a means of?
So this is Amy. As you're reading that, I realized I left out an important piece. They're recording it in the EMR. They're trying to get rid of the paper. And while templates are great, we want to, as sites, we want to make sure we're capturing the data that you guys need for your endpoints. But if we want less paper and we're trying to put some of that in the EMR, there we have Epic across our sites. They have smart phrases that people put in. You build them, and you copy and paste, and it tells you what you need to fill in. And you can include that, route it to the physician, they sign off, and you got your source doc. So if you have a paper template, that's great, but sites may still end up creating their own templates in the EMR.
Well, that's definitely technology that's beyond my scope of what I can talk about, but I see where you're coming from. I agree. And so I think if you have, the right tech person that would be able to take that information from a paper form that can be incorporated into your EMR, that makes sense. I understand where you're coming from. So, and I will add that to the list.
Well, and to what Dawn had said as well.
Yeah, like maybe we could set up like a working group to try to think of, you know, universal phrases or smart phrases or things to make it easier for physicians and staff for, you know, what's required from a documentation standpoint. So not every site is doing the exact same thing, you know, making it up themselves. I think we need some like good practices so that we can learn from each other. And maybe that's something we need to work on with a working group of CRAs from sites, as well as a group from the stats data management office, to try to figure out how to help facilitate that.
Right.
And it's also part of CTAC and NCI, and they're like what they want to hone in on, and being able to extract some of this information from the EMR directly. And I know that comes like with labs, but if you get some of these smart phrases and these templates built in there, you have routine ways of putting it in, it can just cross over right to Raven. That saves staff time and allows more patients to be enrolled and sites to be more efficient. So I mean, it's just this cycle, and you said integration's not going to go away.
Right.
Great ideas. Thank you for all the input. I think we'll move now to the NCI feedback, which was our fourth agenda item. We'll save the third for last. Dr. Parker is going to present to us now. So we're going to move this CRA turnover issues to the last agenda item. Next slide, please. So Dr. Parker.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me, Ray?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. I want to thank you and thank Don, both Ray and Don, for this invitation and for me to provide hopefully a brief synopsis of what's going on in our realm since the COVID pandemic, as you all know, which we all hope is waning at this point, which began in December 2019 and significantly began impacting the nation in March of 2020. As you all know, there was a prioritization of care for patients with infections and complications from the virus, from the SARS-CoV-2. And so oncology clinical trials were then faced with new challenges, as you know, from patient accrual to conducting the trials, which significantly impacted the aims and the outcomes. So leadership across the oncology research spectrum then seized upon this as an opportunity because of these dire consequences to create novel approaches to transforming the clinical research. So what I'm saying is pretty much sort of like a tag on of what Joe Unger had mentioned about earlier in the presentation earlier today in the other session. So this moment of opportunity allowed for researchers in various areas, such as in the federal government, private, academic, and all of you that are in the community sites. So everyone convened somewhat emergently to seek ways to tackle two issues. That's how to strategize ways for conducting oncology research during the COVID era, and to utilize these strategies to enhance and sustain a more streamlined approach to designing and performing oncology clinical research. So next slide, please. Thanks. This pretty much defined NCI's rapid response to the pandemic, all of the bullets that you see there. CTAC, Clinical Trials and Translational Research Advisory Committee that was held and led by James Darashow, convened to identify the challenges and create solutions in overcoming the roadblocks from both COVID-19 related roadblocks as well as other roadblocks in conducting the cancer clinical trials. The aims can be crystallized pretty much as ways to streamline clinical trials, to decentralize trial activities, and to improve patient access to trials. And so therefore, these bullets outlined points of concern and solutions that are as follows. As you know about the first bullet about electronic consenting, the second bullet, oral investigational drugs being sent directly to patients. And an update for that is that the oral agent shipment, we're talking CTAP, IND oral drugs from the NCTN. The direct mailing will continue indefinitely. The third bullet, initiating of electronic rather than in-person study audits that was previously discussed very well in the previous discussion. The fourth bullet, facilitated use of telemedicine for study visits. Now, just wanted to point out that a survey and an analysis for evaluating telemedicine usage in NCI clinical trials before and after COVID-19 was performed. And the update that I can give you for that is that the telemedicine survey results will be presented by Dr. Ward and McCaskill-Stevens at the next quarterly NCORP community MU sites meeting that will be on November 16th. So that's November the 16th, and that's at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So, you know, if you can have that placed into your calendars, and I'm sure that Marge Good will also send an email out for that. She's great at doing that. The fifth bullet, limited impact on for minor study deviations. Laboratory and imaging can be decentralized, as you see. And then the seventh bullet, developing new strategic plans, plan for NCI's clinical trials. This is to develop a faster, flexible, simpler, less expensive, high impact clinical trials, set of clinical trials that are seamlessly integrated with clinical practice where where you all are actually doing the research. Next slide, please, is just the next slide shows, let's just proceed to the next slide, actually. Next slide. Yeah, so this shows an implementation timeline that focuses on 3 activities that seem to be most beneficial for enhancing and streamlining oncology clinical trials. And the first focuses on telehealth use, and the other 2 actually addressed accrual, particularly to broaden the eligibility, which is your second row, and then to enhance diversity of participants in the third column. And these action plans are actually, the action plans are subsequently published and to document the novel proposals to the challenges that were encountered in conducting cancer clinical trials during the COVID epidemic. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So the next slide, this shows actually the publication, all the various stakeholders that I mentioned earlier, government, private, academic, etc. That were, so this is published, and we can just go to the next slide, actually. Next slide basically highlights the published, these are the highlights that within the published report. And pretty much this is an iteration of what I had discussed a couple of slides earlier. Let's go to the next slide, please. So again, for the update, in this case, update on the Endcaps study, the longitudinal natural history study. As bulleted within, you see that it was activated on May 21st, 2020. The target was 2,000 patients. Actually, down at the bottom in red or burgundy, you'll see that 1,476 patients were screened and 1,337 were actually enrolled as of 2 days ago of October 10th. So highlights for this, for Endcaps, is that capitation is by the group that's credited. There's a pediatric amendment that was activated on the 23rd of September last year. This year, Amendment 4 was activated, and they had the addition of a pediatric COVNet cohort. COVNet is a large-scale genome-wide association study and a whole genome sequencing for determining the severity of COVID. It's to identify the common as well as rare germline genetic variants that are associated with susceptibility to severe or fatal COVID-19 disease. Other bullets, reduction in volume of data collection, and then there's a new optional vaccine correlative sub-study to collect blood specimens to better understand response to vaccine in the cancer patients. The final slide is the next slide. the next slide basically is just to remind you again that the quarterly meeting for the MU-NCORP Community and Minority Underserved PIs webinar is for September 16th from 4 typically to 5, but it'd be best, I guess, to sort of pencil down 1.5 hours Eastern time. Thank you all again for all that you do, all of the sites, community sites that continue to perform oncology research while also providing excellent care to your cancer patients. Thank you for all that you do. I'm open to questions.
Dr. Parker, pretty impressive accrual into the Endcaps study. Are you able to share with us the proportion of those numbers that came from MU-NCORP sites?
No, regrettably, Ray, I can't. I'm unable to do that right now. But you know, I'm sure that we'll see when that's available. But I'm sorry, I'm unable to do that right now.
So, Dr. Parker, I think, being at a site, myself and seeing some of these changes, we're super excited about, all of these opportunities to make studies more accessible to patients. And, have any of the sites or any investigators raised any concerns about this, or regulatory agencies about some of these steps that the NCI has made?
No, Dr. Hirschman, I hadn't heard any additional concerns raised from the sites. But then again, it's likely that WARDA has heard, and these are good questions to ask. These are things that I can convey to her and find out. But I hadn't heard anything right now, none that I can recall at this point.
I think it sort of very much links into our previous conversations about how to, when you do telehealth, how to make sure you're getting all the pieces of information in the real time and linking all that information with PRO related information so that we're making sure that we're getting the highest quality data even amongst patients that aren't coming in. So I think that there's great opportunities, but it's going to take some work to help guide all the sites in terms of strategies to make sure that we're getting, making it as convenient as we can for our patients, but also making sure that we're capturing key pieces of information. So lots of research to be done to help inform everybody about best practices. I don't know if anybody, Ray, if you want to take over, but if any of the sites have any specific comments about whether or not they found these changes to be helpful, or any other suggestions of other changes they think might be helpful.
Yeah, we're really excited that there will be lemonade out of the lemon that is COVID. Certainly a nothing but short of transformation of our clinical trials enterprise to leverage technology more and to get rid of some of the barriers that we sort of have accumulated inadvertently over time, things that are obsolete that we really should blow out of the pathway. Why does the patient have to go to a special lab just to get a simple CBC because they're on a clinic? It just makes no sense when we think about it. So hopefully we can come up with a hardcore group of lessons learned that will enable us to really make clinical trials less expensive, much more convenient, more meaningful to people. I have to admit, I just have to admit, myself, I see patients myself in the clinical center at NIH, and I have to admit that over the past couple of years, I miss seeing some of them. We've over the years have developed that relationship, but at the same time, I'm so happy that the convenience for them to receive their medicines from home and to get their laboratory work. But for someone like myself, that does phase 1 type work in the clinical center, it's something, there's some give and take. I
think one thing we do need to really think about with our clinical trial design, not to harp on missing this too much, but you know, it is, if we're having patients draw bloods at home, we're missing research samples. There's no question about it. You know, how do we incorporate that missingness into clinical trials, or even better, develop strategies to get those research samples from patients in their own environment. So I think that that's something that we and the greater research community needs to work together to try to figure out, you know, how to do that. Any other questions from the site?
Well, Dr. Parker, thank you so much.
Thank
Very
you.
informative. Looking forward to seeing how this evolves. So our last opportunity now, we maybe have 5 minutes left, is to really hear back from our colleagues out in the field. What ongoing challenges are there? We had specifically talked about turnover among clinical research associates, CRA turnover. Clearly, COVID's been hard on everyone. This is a specific perspective. How are people coping with staffing in this trying labor market that we're all experiencing?
And with that comment, is there anything that we could think of to bring back, to be creative, to think about if there's any kinds of resources that could be centralized to help sites? I bring this up because, you know, not a day goes by where we're not dealing with one person leaving or another person out on sick leave, or, you know, some other kind of drama. And so, you know, it does pose huge challenges for patients that are on trials and continuing sort of the mission when turnover is as high as it is. So I don't know if any sites have thought at all about that.
Open mic. Anyone with a perspective? Jeff?
Well, we just talked about this, actually. We've been talking about this a lot, and it amounts here locally. The cost of living is super high. So I don't know if you can give us more money. That certainly would help. I mean, and also, I guess, you know, career growth as an opportunity. I mean, that's sort of an internal issue for our center. We're trying to work on that. I guess some of the individuals are certainly interested in leadership and, you know, in activity at the different research bases. That might help. We're having a real problem. Basically, we're getting college grads who stay with us for 1 or 2 years, and then they're gone. And very few long-standing individuals. That's been a real problem for us. And I don't know, Kate is on the phone. She's our manager, and she's thought about this a lot. And maybe she has something that she could contribute. Kate, are you there out there? Anyway, it's a real problem for us.
Everybody's so quiet. Do you think that there's anything that we could be doing to engage the CRAs better that you think might make a difference in terms of job satisfaction or other kinds of?
Yeah.
I see Marge just put in
Yeah.
a comment about career ladders. Like,
We've
are
talked
there
to
other
Marge.
things we could be doing?
We've talked to Marge about that. Our CRAs are actually very engaged, at least in terms of, you know, participating in these meetings and things, and I think it does help. It's when we have a high percentage of our CRAs who attend, for example, the administrator webinar. We got recognized for that, and it's just trying to the career ladder, I think, if we can get our own institution to buy into that, would help us, because that would give growth. Versus, no, you're not going to retain everybody, but the turnover is terrible. It's really awful.
I know it all comes down to money. Maybe Marge wants to comment on maybe some questions that she's heard. One of the things that we really face now more so than ever, and I don't know if this is a universal phenomenon, but I certainly would be interested in hearing, is a lot of our staff is being hired by industry now that they don't, a lot of their work is remote. They don't need to be in a certain location, and they pay more. So then we have the resources to pay. And I don't know if other institutions or individuals have had similar problems, or, you know, if we can think as a group of what other kinds of incentives, either through SWOG or through the NCI, of things to keep people in an academic environment.
Yeah, we implemented career ladders several years ago. And I think they do help. They give people the feeling of, positive feedback and the feeling of the opportunity for advancement. The challenge then becomes, you can have ladders with, rungs that are so close together that, there's not as much meaning to it as otherwise. So I think to have ladders for the sake of ladders is one thing. One does still need to grapple with HR and institutional policy about, how far spread the rungs on the ladder can be. I think that's an ongoing challenge for us. And totally agree about the value of exit interviews. That I personally found that to be extremely helpful, including in finding out when there have been weird things going on in terms of, supervisory interactions that have allowed us to know when there was a need to reevaluate our processes for supervising staff, stuff like that. So I would definitely strongly advocate for standardizing exit interviews for people who leave the program. You learn a lot.
Well, I would say that if at SWOG, through any of our resources, our educational opportunities, even grants, or if there's anybody has any insights into programs we can develop that would help engage, the CRAs better, or provide other types of career opportunities, please let us know, because we always have opportunities through the Hope Foundation and other resources if those types of things might make a difference in terms of keeping staff. So
yeah, Don, one thing I would say is to continue to encourage CRAs to participate in when we go back to in-person meetings. I know we already have that, but I would even invest even more in that, encouraging people to travel, to interact, to network, to learn on site at the spring and fall meetings. If there was some way to expand access across, especially to our sites that are, that we want to encourage to continue to perform, and maybe to continue to improve on their performance, that would be one thing I would strongly support.
Right.
All right. Well, I think we're 3 minutes past our allotted hour. This has been a very interesting meeting. Does anybody have any last words they want to share with us? No? Okay, next time in Seattle, we can only hope.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Stay well out there. Be careful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.